What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some perspective from the local city level. So we'll kind of zoom in into St. Cloud, Minnesota. For those of you who don't know where St. Cloud is, it's a regional center, about 66,000 population. It's about an hour northwest of Minneapolis in Minnesota. Been on the council for 8 years, so I've seen quite a few things develop over the years. St. Cloud is a refugee relocation city, along with Wilmer and Minneapolis. And I want to say on my watch, this really started brewing in St. Cloud approximately 3 years ago, where my constituents, I represent Ward 4, started asking questions about the Refugee Resettlement Program, about why am I spending money on a program that I have no representation. This is a classic case of taxation without representation. So this started to boil over time, and finally last August, I sat down with one of the VOLOGs, which is Lutheran Social Services, that is the contractor for St. Cloud, along with the county commissioner, and two activists that were very familiar with this program, very well educated. And we sat down with 4 staff members of Lutheran Social Services and started asking questions. And from that meeting, I have to say I was pretty upset from what I found out. To summarize that meeting, what I saw, 4 things were occurring. Is one, we have a nonprofit religious organization, okay, taking federal dollars, and they were pocketing approximately $1,000 per refugee. The allocation is about $3,300, but they got to keep about $1,000 per refugee. Okay, they were not being transparent with the public, and it got to the point where they actually had a deputy at the door and monitoring who was coming into the meetings. And I said, you need to open up these meetings because you're using federal dollars, you're a nonprofit organization. And to me, it was becoming apparent that they were acting like a for-profit corporation. So from that meeting, there was a lot of confusion. The meetings were still not transparent. So finally, what led up to kind of a culminating event in St. Cloud was a resolution that I had introduced into the city council in November. And it's a simple 1-page resolution. I call it legalized plagiarism. All I did is about 2/3 of this resolution was quoted right from the Refugee Act of 1980. And I'd like to read a couple parts. Mark mentioned it early on in the presentation. It's so important I want to mention it again just briefly. And this is the actual language in the resolution. It says, whereas the Refugee Act of 1980 states at 8 U.S. Code 1522 2B, quote, the director, I'm talking about the Minnesota Office of Refugee Resettlement Director, shall develop and implement, in consultation with representatives of voluntary agencies and state and local governments, that's me, okay, policies and strategies for the placement and resettlement of refugees within the United States. The next paragraph has even more teeth from the U.S. Code. Whereas the Refugee Act of 1980 states in 8 U.S. Code 1522 2C2, the director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement will's a pretty strong word, quote, provide for a mechanism whereby representatives of local affiliates of voluntary agencies regularly, not less than quarterly, meet with representatives of state and local governments to plan and coordinate in advance of their arrival the appropriate placement of refugees amongst various state and localities. What was going on here in St. Cloud is Lutheran Social Services, and after kind of pulling some teeth, they finally got their abstract to kind of find out what was going on, is they were going ahead with this process, and then because I was so persistent, it was like show and tell. I'd show up to the quarterly meetings, and they'd tell me what they did. My argument is that is a violation of federal law. That is not in advance planning, all right? This is show and tell. I'm finding out after the fact. So what was going on, this was feeding into the frustration, again, to the taxpayers, the people of Ward 4 of St. Cloud that I represent. Now, this resolution deals with primary resettlement. It doesn't deal with secondary migration. Yeah, at no point in time did this resolution insinuate that we want to control someone who gets placed in Los Angeles or Fort Wayne, Indiana, who wants to migrate to St. Cloud. That's not what this is about. I'm dealing primarily with the primary resettlement number. The saturation allocation for St. Cloud for fiscal year 2018 is 225 refugees. That's what I was focusing on. And what I'm finding out here is in St. Cloud is it is placing a burden on our services. Now, what I'm seeing here is the county, Stearns County, is the agency that actually doles out the various services, you know, like Minnesota Care and those type of things, not the city. The problem here is St. Cloud is the largest city in Stearns County. We're the county seat. You know, the citizens I represent, you know, we're part of the county as well. And again, they are more concerned about their money being spent on the program without representation. And what's going on is, for quite some time, the commissioners were saying, go talk to the council. The councils would say, this is a federal issue, go talk to the congressman, go talk to the governor, go talk to him or her. And again, I'm on the front lines dealing with the people. I'm it. I deal with everything from garbage to this issue here. Now, it's pretty clear to me early on that the resolution, this is not binding. As a council member, I can't bind anybody. I can't bind the city. Even if it passed, all it is just advisory in nature. So some folks from the opposing side were very upset by this. I'm dealing exclusively with the economics. We had one gentleman by the name of Dr. John Palmer about 3 weeks ago, a retired professor, very gifted researcher, did a presentation on this 20-page report. And he actually compared some of the demographics. Hmong community, they were part of, they were resettled some years ago, and they actually assimilated very well into Minnesota. So he compared the Hmong community with the Mexicans and the Somalis. The Somalis are the biggest group in part of the Refugee Resettlement Program. And he found, to no surprise, that the Somali community was dead last in terms of, the highest amount of poverty, unemployment, things of that nature. And his conclusion is that as a state, we ought to be embarrassed by this. I said, this program isn't working, and we continue to take in more refugees. One of the examples I use, I like boating in airplanes. Now, if you go on a cruise ship, you have to have lifeboats. Those lifeboats are U.S. Coast Guard certified to hold a certain amount of people. Let's say it's 100 people. And let's say you're out on that lifeboat and you have to put folks in because the ship just went down. All right? If it's U.S. Coast Guard certified for 100 and you put in 104 survivors, no one's going to give you a hard time. If you put in 800 survivors, the lifeboat's going to go down and you're going to kill everybody. That's the example I use in St. Cloud with primary resettlement here. This is kind of after the fact, and I'm finding out from this abstract that the proposed nationalities was Burmese, Ethiopia, Iraq, Kenya, and Somalia. The latest report I got was about 3 weeks ago, so the first quarter allocation into St. Cloud, we only got 18 refugees. So obviously in the Trump administration has President Trump's position on vetting refugees and stronger mechanisms seems to be having an effect in Minnesota. So this is a very controversial issue in St. Cloud, and I think what's going to happen is I believe that this is or could very well be the #1 issue at the voting booth in Minnesota this fall. I think the 4 council members are up for re-election. I think there's going to be a real house cleaning. Now, I serve at the will of the people. If the people don't want me in there because I'm asking questions about the economics, that's fine. I like politics. It's not that important to me. I'm not using it to go up the ladder somewhere. I use it because I care. So I have that attitude. But I think we're going to see a real house cleaning, not only the council, but also some of our legislative reps and even the governor's race. Our governor is retiring this year, so that's kind of an open seat.